I'd like to show you how to do a join in QGIS. This is a way we can get tabular data connected to corresponding features in a data layer, and many data that we get in natural resources come with the spatial features and then additional tables will join in. Most common, which is perhaps the soils data, but there's Forest Service inventory data, census data, a bunch of other data that come with a set of spatial data and then tables to join in. So here I have a bit of soils data for a real small portion of Cook County in northeastern Minnesota. And if I click on one of these soils polygons, I can see that there are various variables associated with this data layer. So there's an area symbol, a spatial version, a map unit symbol, and a map unit key. And then I have a table here, if I open the attribute table, that also has variables. It has a map unit ID, which is the same as the key in the values that I see. So here I have this 277455 and 277474. So these are basically the variable I'll use to join from the table to my polygonal features. And you always have what's called a key, or should have a key. I'll talk about the structure of the key in both the table you're going to join in and in the attribute table. So if I take a close look here at the attribute table for this soils data layer, I can see then that I have this area symbol, spatial version, map unit symbol, and a map unit key. And the literature on the data, the documentation that comes with it, shows me that this is the key and tells me this is what I'm going to use to join things, the value here in this table and in this auxiliary table, which I've subset out of another table. So how do we do the join? Well, it's pretty straightforward. In the main data layer itself, I'll right-click and go to Properties. And in the Properties, then I'll go down to the Joins and I'll add a new join. It'll ask me what's the join layer, so it's going to be just this augs tables. The join field is going to be that map unit ID. Here it's named map unit ID, and here it's named map unit key, but it's the same number, right? That the name is different doesn't mean anything. Often it's named the same, but it doesn't have to be. Then I'll say OK, and apply, and OK. And now if I open the soils data layer, I have an attribute table that's been expanded. It's incorporated all the data that was in that table and matched them by the key. So it's taken a look at where this key is the same in both tables and created rows, taking that auxiliary table and copying the variables over into a table that matches this key here on this key by key basis. I'll have a document that will show you this, a figure, in just a second. So that allows me then to, using these new data, for example, map this new table by, instead of just a single symbol, I can categorize, for example, by the flood frequency, right? Or the drainage class, or the percent ponded. So if I look at the flood frequency and I classify the values, there's a frequent or non-frequent flood, and apply it and say OK, now I have that table information to show where I get frequent floods and where I don't. So I can bring in data in separate tables as long as I have a properly formed key in my table and in my spatial data, my polygon attribute table, and use all this valuable information. Well, what do I mean by properly formed data? The key has to be a correct key. If it isn't, I'll run into issues. What I'm doing when I do the join is I'm identifying an attribute in one table to match to an attribute in another. So in my first table there, my augs tab, I was basically saying, take this, and every time you find a code, in this case something like X, it matches the code in the other column in the second table. Remember I said first use that map ID and then use the map unit key? Copy those data matching across that value to a new row in the table. So it basically takes these and kind of attaches it here where there's an X based on the X. And so I have this one FR 1001 from this first row where it matches, and then the X and the AG in one from this matching row. And so I build the row that way. There's another X that it matches here, right? The X is 2GM101, 2GM101, and then the AG and the 1, the AG and the 1 here, it matches. And it goes row by row and matches along. Now you notice the order can change, right? There's this Z that matches here to a Z here. And so it says, okay, 3AG99, 3AG99, Z FR8, right? It's going to get the FR and 8 from down here to match. And so I'm doing a match across for each of these to build this new view on a new table. Now it actually doesn't, in most cases, write out a new table. It just shows them together. If I want to save these matches, I have to save and export to a new data set. So here's what it's doing. It's doing the match across, right, and builds the row, and then it does it again and builds the row. Every place there's a match, and does that all the way to the end and builds the row. So I'm basically matching and creating a synthesis of the two. So any data I have in another table that has a properly formed key, I could bring in and use that in an analysis of my data layer. Now, what do I mean by a properly formed key? If I have a code that doesn't have a match, right? So here, basically, there's an X, Y, and W. Here, there's sort of no A, G, GM, and SP, but there's no FR. Well, if there's no FR, then wherever there's an FR in this first one, there's nothing to put in. I don't know whether to put an X, Y, or W. I just don't know what value to put in. So where that X, Y, or W code value would go, it's left to null, right? And this is fine. We do this all the time. Now, there are some setups that can say we'll ignore columns or ignore values where we don't have a match, but we're typically not doing that. It's the difference between what we call an inner and an outer join. We typically just get a lot of nulls that show up where there aren't values for a match here. In this case, the FR. If I'm matching type to type, I don't know what value to put in for code, so I just give it a null value. And that's typically not an error, although if we expect there to be matches all the way across, then it is an error, and we have to find out why the FR is missing here. A more common type of error is if I have many values in my table that I'm joining in to match to values in my table on the left. So here I'm matching on type and I have two FR values. I don't know which one to join in. Now this is an improper join. You should never do a join like this. Right? You need a one-to-one or one-to-many. This is called a many-to-many because there's many FRs in both sides. If I had one here, it would be a unique match all the way across. Here I don't know which to match, a V or N, right? So I don't know to match this one or this one. My code value would vary. This is wrong. You should never do this. It's an improper join. If I were to join in the wrong direction, so suppose I had the table set up right, there were only one FR here and I joined in the wrong direction, it would also be ambiguous. That's why I have to be careful in both the construction of the table you're joining in, the key has to have unique values, and in the direction you do the join. If you flip those tables, you'll get a wrong join. In the piece of software that I showed you, it had the table coming in. We used that aux tab, and we joined it into our spatial data, and that's typically what we do is a table without spatial information, but attributes we join into our spatial table. If you do it the other way, you'll probably get it wrong. And so again, ambiguity here, and ambiguity every time there's an FR to match on both sides. This table wouldn't work. So you don't want to do a join that's many to many or many to one. You want to have basically unique values in your key and join across. And then you can do a join and join in all sorts of information. If we want to get rid of the join when we're done, well, I'll say first I should show you if we want to save the join, right? Usually these data are not permanent. If I were now to copy my soils data here to another computer or another file and then just load it up again, I wouldn't have any of this joined in information. It would just be back to the original files because it doesn't pull them along with it. It doesn't do the join. I can save this project and the join will live in the project as long as the data are in the same place. But if I want to make this join permanent, I'll have to right-click and export and save the features as to a new data layer, and then it'll copy all the features over, right? Including all the stuff in the table with all the new variables. If I want to get rid of the join, again, I can right-click and go to Properties and go to the join and select it and then get rid of it and say apply and OK, and now the join is gone. Although it doesn't change the symbology automatically. If I open the attribute table now, I can send back to my original variables, and I've lost those additional variables. So that's how to do a join and take a join off real quick. Lots of applications.